I didn't know which was more terrifying, the fact that my entire life had just shattered into a million pieces, or the fact that two of the most dangerous women in the city were now looking at me like I was their next meal. Welcome back to the channel. If you love thrilling, spicy, and suspenseful girl love stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and comment down below. Your support helps bring more of these stories to life. Now let's dive right into the drama. Part 1: The Shattered Glass and the Velvet Room. The rain was coming down in relentless, freezing sheets by the time I finally reached the front steps of our apartment building. I was 26 years old, exhausted, and running on fumes. I had just pulled a brutal 14-hour shift at the architectural firm, staring at blueprints until my vision blurred. The only thing keeping me going was the thought of her. Emma, my girlfriend of 3 years. We had built a life together, a quiet, comfortable routine in the heart of Chicago. I had stopped at a late-night bakery to pick up her favorite red velvet cupcakes, a small surprise to make up for my crazy hours. I quietly unlocked the door to our apartment, slipping my wet shoes off in the hallway. The apartment was completely dark, save for a faint, flickering light coming from down the hall. Candle. Smelled like expensive vanilla and sandalwood, not our usual cheap air fresheners. A soft smile touched my lips. I thought she was being romantic. I thought she was waiting for me. But as I walked closer, the soft sounds drifting from our bedroom made my blood run instantly cold. It wasn't the sound of someone sleeping or watching TV. It was the unmistakable, breathy rhythm of two people entangled with one another. My heart slammed against my ribs, a sudden, violent drumbeat in the quiet apartment. Cupcake box slipped from my damp fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a soft, sickening thud. The frosting smeared against the plastic window of the box, ruined. Just like everything else was about to be. I pushed the bedroom door open. The scene burned itself into my retinas with agonizing clarity. The tangled sheets. The soft glow of the candlelight illuminating the smooth skin of my girlfriend's back. And beneath her, someone else. A blonde woman I recognized instantly. Madison, a supposed work friend Emma had been spending a lot of time with over the past few months. Emma, my voice cracked. Sounded small, pathetic, completely hollowed out. Two women froze. Emma scrambled backward, pulling the duvet up to her chest, her eyes wide with panic as she stared at me standing in the doorway. Madison just looked annoyed, lazily pulling a pillow over her face. "Olivia!" Emma gasped, her voice trembling as she frantically tried to cover herself. "Olivia, wait. I thought you were working until midnight. Let me explain. Please, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I whispered. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, that it bypassed my tear ducts and settled directly in the center of my chest like a block of ice. 3 years. 3 years of shared finances, of talking about adopting a dog, of planning a wedding in the mountains. Reduced to dirty laundry and cheap lies. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the hall closet. I grabbed my heavy winter coat, my phone, and my wallet. "Olivia, please." "Where are you going?" Emma cried, stumbling out of the bedroom wrapped in a sheet. She reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. I flinched as if she had burned me. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice dead, devoid of all the warmth she had come to expect from me. "I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not staying here. I'll send for my things tomorrow." Before she could utter another pathetic excuse, I slammed the heavy wooden door behind me, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. The moment I stepped back out into the freezing Chicago rain, the numbness broke. A choked sob tore from my throat. The icy downpour soaked through my coat in seconds, but I didn't care. I just started walking. I walked for blocks, the neon signs of the city bleeding together through the tears in my eyes. I had no destination. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that apartment as physically possible. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my pocket. "Emma." I turned it off. After what felt like hours of aimless wandering, my legs began to give out. Chill had settled deep into my bones, and my teeth were chattering uncontrollably. I looked up and saw a discreet glowing neon sign reading the Obsidian Lounge. It was an ultra-exclusive high-end club that I walked past sometimes on my lunch breaks. The kind of place that required a membership and a bank account with a minimum of 6 zeros. There was a massive, suited bouncer at the door holding a heavy velvet rope. I don't know what possessed me. Desperation, maybe. Or just the urgent need to stop freezing to death. I walked right up to him. I was dripping wet, my hair plastered to my face, mascara running down my cheeks in dark, messy streaks. He looked down at me, his expression stony. For a long moment, I thought he was going to shove me back onto the wet pavement. But maybe he saw the absolute wreckage in my eyes. He unhooked the velvet rope and stepped aside without a word. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me like a physical weight. The air was warm, thick with the scent of fine leather, aged bourbon, and expensive perfume. Low, throbbing bass vibrated through the floorboards, a slow, sensual rhythm that seemed to dictate the heartbeat of everyone in the room. The lighting was impossibly dim, cast in hues of deep amber and crimson. Women in designer dresses and men in sharp, tailored suits occupied the velvet booths, their conversations hushed and secretive. I looked completely out of place. A drowned rat in a sea of swans. But I didn't care. I marched straight to the long, glowing mahogany bar. "Whiskey," I told the bartender, a man in a crisp black vest who looked at my wet clothes with polite disdain. "Whatever your strongest is. Leave the bottle." He poured me a glass of something dark and amber. I threw it back in one burning gulp, gasping as the fiery liquid scorched a path down my throat. It hurt, but it was a better pain than the one in my chest. I sat there for maybe 30 minutes, drowning my sorrows, letting the alcohol blur the edges of my reality. I was just pouring my fourth glass when the entire energy of the room suddenly shifted. It was palpable. The low murmur of conversation abruptly died down. The throbbing music seemed to fade into the background. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Slowly, I turned my head toward the entrance. Crowd was parting. Powerful, wealthy men were actively stepping out of the way, averting their eyes out of a strange mixture of respect and sheer terror. 2 women were walking through the lounge. They moved with a predatory grace that commanded the absolute attention of every single soul in the room. The first woman was tall, with sharp, aristocratic features and piercing, icy blue eyes that looked like they could freeze water. She wore a tailored, immaculate black velvet suit that hugged her lean frame perfectly, an aura of cold, calculating dominance radiating from her every step. The woman walking slightly behind her was a devastating contrast. She had dark, cascading hair that tumbled over her shoulders, and eyes the color of dark chocolate, gleaming with a wicked, playful amusement. She wore a crimson silk blouse, unbuttoned dangerously low, paired with fitted leather pants. While the blonde looked like a queen who would order your execution without blinking, the brunette looked like she would gladly do the deed herself and smile while doing it. I had heard whispers about the local syndicates. Everyone in Chicago knew who really ran the underground. Victoria and Scarlett Rossi. The Rossi sisters. Mafia royalty. They owned the judges, the police, and most of the real estate on this side of the river. I should have looked away. I should have stared at my whiskey glass like everyone else. But the alcohol in my system made me reckless, and the absolute devastation of my night had drained me of any instinct for self-preservation. I stared right at them. As they walked past the bar toward their VIP section, Scarlett, the brunette in the crimson shirt, paused. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her dark eyes swept over the room before locking directly onto mine. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across her perfectly painted lips. She tapped her sister's arm. Victoria paused, her icy blue gaze following Scarlett's line of sight until both of their eyes were fixed on me. I suddenly felt very small, very wet, and entirely too sober for this. My breath caught in my throat as Scarlett changed her direction, stepping away from the VIP area and walking slowly, deliberately right toward my stool at the bar. Victoria followed, her expression unreadable, though a dangerous curiosity flickered in her cold eyes. The rest of the bar held its collective breath. Scarlett came to a stop just inches from my chair. She smelled like dark cherries, smoke, and expensive danger. She leaned in, resting her elbows on the mahogany bar, trapping me between her arms. "Well, well," Scarlett purred, her voice a husky, intoxicating rasp that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "What is a beautiful, heartbroken little bird doing drowning her sorrows in our club on a night like this?" Victoria stood right behind her, towering over me, her cold eyes analyzing every inch of my trembling frame. "She looks freezing, Scarlett," Victoria noted, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "And completely alone." "Are you alone, little bird?" Scarlett whispered, reaching out to tuck a wet strand of hair behind my ear. Her fingers were warm, and her touch made my pulse race in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was trapped in the gaze of two predators who had just found something they desperately wanted to keep. End of Part 1. Part 2, The Velvet Cage. I stared at Scarlett's dark, amused eyes, my brain entirely short-circuiting as I struggled to formulate a single coherent thought. Cheap whiskey I had just swallowed was buzzing warmly in my veins, but it did absolutely nothing to dull the overwhelming, suffocating intensity radiating from the two women who now had me completely boxed in. I was acutely aware of every single breath I took, of the heavy, intoxicating blend of dark cherry and expensive smoke that clung to Scarlett, and the crisp, icy scent of ozone and power that seemed to follow Victoria. My voice was a pathetic, raspy whisper that barely made it past my lips. I cleared my throat, trying to summon whatever tiny shred of dignity I had left. "I'm just having a drink. I'm fine." Victoria let out a soft, elegant scoff from behind me. It wasn't mocking, but rather a sharp, clinical observation of a very foolish lie. "You are shivering so violently that your teeth are practically chattering against the rim of that glass," she stated, her cool blue eyes systematically scanning the damp, ruined fabric of my winter coat. "Your clothes are soaked through to your skin, and your eyes tell a very clear story of someone whose entire world has just violently collapsed. A cheap glass of whiskey will not fix that, sweetheart." Scarlett's smile widened into something dangerously predatory. She leaned in even closer, the soft leather of her jacket brushing against my wet sleeve. "My sister is right," she murmured, her dark eyes dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before meeting my gaze again. "This is no place for a little bird with a broken wing. Not on a night like this. You need to be somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." "I don't even know you," I managed to say, my fingers gripping the edge of the mahogany bar so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. "Oh, but we know you, Olivia," Victoria said smoothly. The sound of my name falling from her lips sent a violent shockwave straight down my spine. My eyes snapped to hers in utter disbelief. I had never met these women in my life. I was a junior architect, a nobody who spent my weekends watching Netflix and buying overpriced groceries. How could the leaders of the most ruthless syndicate in Chicago possibly know my name? Before I could even process the question, Scarlett reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek, black titanium card, tossing it onto the bar counter with a soft clatter. The bartender, Marcus, practically materialized out of thin air, his eyes wide and deferential. "Put her drinks on our tab, Marcus," Scarlett ordered, her tone shifting from seductive to authoritative in the blink of an eye. "And leave the bottle. In fact, clear the bar. We are taking the girl." "Of course, Miss Rossi." "Immediately," the bartender stammered, bowing his head slightly and backing away as if he were in the presence of royalty. "Wait, what?" Panic finally managed to pierce through the heavy fog of my heartbreak and the alcohol. "I didn't say I was going anywhere with you. I can't just leave with two strangers." Victoria took a slow, deliberate step forward, entirely closing the remaining distance between us. She loomed over me, a terrifying vision of absolute authority wrapped in black velvet. When she spoke, her voice was low, commanded absolute obedience, and left absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are freezing, Olivia. You have nowhere else to go. We are not asking." Without another word, Scarlett's hand wrapped around my wrist. Her grip was firm, unyielding, but surprisingly gentle. She didn't drag me, she simply pulled me to my feet, guiding me away from the bar stool. My legs felt like absolute jelly. Between the emotional trauma of finding Emma in our bed with another woman, the freezing rain, and the alcohol, I possessed zero strength to fight back. And somewhere, deep in the darkest, most reckless corner of my mind, I realized I didn't actually want to. The walk through the lounge was a blur. The sea of wealthy patrons parted for us like the Red Sea, averting their eyes as Victoria and Scarlett escorted me toward the exit. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the freezing Chicago air hit me like a slap to the face. But I didn't feel the rain. A massive, imposing man in a sharp black suit immediately stepped forward, snapping open an enormous black umbrella to shield us from the downpour. Lined up along the curb were 3 identical armored black SUVs, their engines purring with a low, menacing hum. Scarlett guided me toward the middle vehicle. The back door was already open, revealing an interior that looked more like a luxury private jet than a car. Soft, ambient lighting illuminated plush leather seats and a fully stocked crystal decanter set. I slid into the back, my wet clothes squelching uncomfortably against the expensive leather. Scarlett slid in right next to me, her thigh pressing warmly against mine, while Victoria took the seat across from us, crossing her long legs and watching me with those piercing blue eyes. The heavy door slammed shut, completely cutting off the sound of the rain and the city, plunging us into a thick, intimate silence. The SUV smoothly pulled away from the curb, flanked by the other 2 vehicles in a tight, impenetrable convoy. "Take off the coat," Victoria commanded, gesturing to my soaking wet outerwear. I hesitated, suddenly incredibly self-conscious. "I'll ruin the seats." "I do not care about the seats," Victoria replied sharply. "I care that you are going to catch pneumonia. Take it off." My trembling fingers fumbled with the buttons. Scarlett let out a soft sigh, batting my hands away. "Let me, little bird," she murmured. With effortless grace, she unbuttoned the heavy, soaked wool and peeled it off my shoulders, tossing it onto the empty seat beside Victoria. Underneath, I was wearing a thin, damp blouse. I shivered violently, wrapping my arms around my chest. Victoria reached beside her, picking up a heavy, custom-tailored cashmere blanket from a compartment and tossing it across my lap. It was ridiculously soft and smelled just like her, sharp, clean, and wildly expensive. "Drink this," Scarlett said, pouring a small amount of an amber liquid from the crystal decanter into a heavy tumbler. "It's better than whatever poison you were drinking in the club. It will warm your blood." I took the glass with shaking hands and took a sip. It was incredibly smooth, burning a delightful, warming path down into my stomach. As the heat began to spread through my limbs, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright finally began to crash. The events of the night rushed back to me in a tidal wave of agonizing clarity. Candlelit hallway. The smell of vanilla. The tangled sheets. Emma's panicked voice. My chest violently contracted, and before I could stop it, a single hot tear escaped, tracking a warm path down my frozen cheek. Scarlett's playful demeanor instantly vanished. Her dark eyes softened, and she reached out, her thumb gently brushing the tear away. Contrast between her reputation as a ruthless mafia boss and the tender, almost reverent way she touched my face was dizzying. "Who did it?" Victoria asked, her voice deadly quiet. It wasn't a question of curiosity. It sounded like an interrogation. "Who put that look in your eyes, Olivia?" I swallowed hard, looking down at my hands. My girlfriend. Emma. I came home early from work and she wasn't alone. Temperature in the SUV seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Victoria's jaw clenched, a dangerous, terrifying shadow falling over her aristocratic features. Scarlett's hand dropped from my face, her nails digging into the leather armrest. I see, Victoria said, her tone dangerously even. And this Emma, she lives in the apartment on West 4th Street? The one with the broken intercom. My head snapped up. How do you know that? Suddenly, my purse, which was resting on the floorboard, began to vibrate wildly. The harsh marimba ringtone of my phone pierced the tense silence of the car. I froze. I knew exactly who it was. Victoria didn't ask for permission. She simply leaned forward, reached into my bag, and pulled out my phone. The screen flashed brightly in the dim cabin. Emma Redheart, incoming call. Victoria stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a look of absolute disgust, she rolled down the tinted window of the moving SUV. Wait, what are you doing? I gasped. Without a single word, Victoria tossed the phone out the window into the freezing, dark rain. She rolled the window back up, sealing us in the quiet luxury of the cabin once again. You will not be needing that anymore, Victoria stated, resting her hands back on her lap as if she hadn't just destroyed an $800 piece of technology. Ties to the past will only weigh you down, especially ties to people who do not know how to value what they hold. You can't just do that, I protested, though the anger in my voice was surprisingly weak. A twisted, dark part of my soul was actually relieved that I wouldn't have to listen to Emma's pathetic excuses. We just did, Scarlett purred, leaning closer to me again, the heat of her body a stark contrast to her sister's cold logic. You belong to a different world now, little bird. The past is dead. Before I could fully process the absolute magnitude of what she was saying, the SUV began to slow down. I peered out the heavily tinted window and saw that we were approaching a massive wrought iron gate set into a towering stone wall. 2 armed guards stepped out of a security booth, recognizing the vehicles immediately and waving us through. We drove up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient, sprawling oak trees until a magnificent, sprawling estate came into view. It was a modern architectural marvel, all dark glass, steel, and imposing stone, sitting on the edge of a massive cliff overlooking Lake Michigan. It looked like a fortress. Beautiful, breathtaking, and utterly inescapable. Convoys stopped at the grand entrance. The doors were opened by waiting staff in immaculate uniforms. Scarlett stepped out first, offering me her hand. I looked at it, hesitating for only a fraction of a second before placing my hand in hers. Her grip was possessive, pulling me out of the vehicle and into the dry, palatial foyer of the mansion. The interior was stunning, with towering ceilings, a massive crystal chandelier, and sweeping double staircases that looked like they belonged in a museum. Maria, Victoria called out, and a sharply dressed housekeeper instantly appeared. Take our guest to the East Wing Master Suite. Draw her a hot bath. Find her some dry clothes. Something silk. Right away, Miss Rossi, the housekeeper nodded, gesturing for me to follow. I stood rooted to the spot, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the situation. I had left my cheap apartment with a cheating girlfriend, and an hour later I was standing in a billionaire's Mafia fortress. I looked back at the 2 women. Victoria was already shrugging off her blazer, looking every inch the deadly queen of the underworld, while Scarlett watched me with a hungry, undeniable heat in her dark eyes. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the massive foyer. What do you want from me? Victoria paused at the base of the grand staircase. She turned slowly, her icy blue eyes locking onto mine, stripping away every defense I had left. Wash the rain and the disappointment off your skin, Olivia, Victoria commanded softly, a dangerous promise lingering in the air between us. We will be waiting for you in the library. And then we will tell you exactly what we want. End of Part 2. Part 3, The Velvet Trap and the Blueprints. The East Wing Master Suite was less of a bedroom and more of a private palace. Maria, the silent, impeccably dressed housekeeper, led me through a set of heavy double doors into a space that radiated an overwhelming, quiet wealth. The floors were heated, dark mahogany, covered partially by plush, cream-colored Persian rugs. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, draped in dark, heavy silks, but Maria guided me past it, straight toward the ensuite bathroom. "Everything has been prepared for you, miss," Maria said, her voice perfectly polite but utterly devoid of any warmth. She gestured toward an enormous, freestanding marble tub sitting in the center of the room. Steam was already rising from the crystal-clear water, carrying the intoxicating, rich scent of bergamot, crushed jasmine, and something earthy that I couldn't quite place. Before I could even thank her, Maria bowed her head slightly and exited the room, the heavy wooden door clicking shut with absolute finality. I stood there alone, the silence ringing in my ears. The adrenaline that had carried me from my apartment to the club and into the back of that armored SUV was finally evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I walked over to the sprawling vanity mirror and stared at my reflection. I looked like a ghost. My skin was pale, my lips blue from the cold rain, my mascara completely washed away. I didn't look like an architect. I didn't look like a woman who had just had her heart ripped out by her girlfriend of 3 years. I looked entirely empty. With trembling fingers, I peeled off the damp, ruined blouse and the rest of my soaked clothes, letting them fall in a pathetic pile on the heated marble floor. I stepped into the tub, sinking slowly into the scalding water. A sharp gasp escaped my lips as the heat finally penetrated my frozen muscles. I closed my eyes and slipped beneath the surface, letting the water muffle the sounds of the world. For a brief, agonizing second, the image of Emma and Madison tangled together in my bed flashed behind my eyelids. The betrayal stung, a sharp, visceral twist of the knife in my chest, but strangely, it felt distant. The absolute terror and electricity of being in the presence of Victoria and Scarlett Rossi had completely overridden my heartbreak. They had kidnapped me. Well, not officially. But they had taken my phone, stripped me of my coat, and brought me to an impenetrable fortress. I was entirely at their mercy. And the most terrifying part of it all? I wasn't trying to find a way out. I washed my hair with shampoos that smelled like wealth and power, scrubbing the scent of the Chicago rain and the cheap club whiskey from my skin. When I finally stepped out of the tub, wrapping myself in a thick, heated towel, I found that Maria had returned silently while I was submerged. My wet, ruined clothes were gone. In their place, laid out meticulously on the velvet ottoman, was a garment. It was a slip dress, made of the heaviest, most luxurious silk I had ever touched. Color was a deep, mesmerizing emerald green that shimmered like a precious gemstone under the bathroom's warm lighting. Next to it lay a matching floor-length silk robe and a delicate pair of black velvet slippers. I slipped the dress over my head. Fit perfectly. Almost too perfectly. The silk cascaded down my body, clinging to my curves like a second skin, the neckline plunging just low enough to be dangerous, the fabric stopping mid-thigh. It was scandalous, incredibly intimate, and undeniably beautiful. I tied the robe tightly around my waist, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs once again as I prepared to face the queens of the underworld. I opened the bedroom door to find Maria waiting in the hallway, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "If you will follow me, miss," she said, turning on her heel. We walked through the sprawling corridors of the estate. The walls were lined with original museum-quality art, the floors covered in thick carpets that completely absorbed our footsteps. I noticed that at the end of every major hallway, a man in a dark suit stood perfectly still, hands resting over the subtle bulges beneath their jackets. It was a beautiful, gilded cage. Finally, Maria stopped in front of a pair of towering, intricately carved oak doors. She pushed them open without knocking, stepped aside, and gestured for me to enter. "They are waiting for you," she murmured. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and stepped across the threshold. The library was breathtaking. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the circular room, filled with thousands of leather-bound volumes. A massive, roaring fire crackled in a grand stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the dark wood paneling. The scent of old paper, expensive leather, and fine aged bourbon hung heavily in the air. Victoria sat in a high-backed leather wing chair near the fire. She had changed out of her wet velvet suit and was now wearing a crisp white tailored dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal a series of dark, intricate tattoos wrapping around her forearms. She held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, her icy blue eyes locking onto me the exact second I entered the room. Scarlett was standing near a massive mahogany globe that served as a hidden bar. She was still wearing those incredibly tight leather pants, but she had swapped her crimson blouse for a loose black silk camisole. When she turned and saw me standing in the doorway in the emerald silk, a low, appreciative hum vibrated in the back of her throat. "Wow," Scarlett purred, her dark eyes slowly, agonizingly dragging up and down my body, making my skin flush hot under her gaze. "Green is absolutely your color, little bird." "I told you, Victoria. Didn't I tell you she would look exquisite?" Victoria took a slow sip of her drink, her gaze analytical, sharp, and undeniably hungry. "You did, sister. Come closer, Olivia. Stand by the fire. You still look pale." I forced my legs to move, crossing the vast expanse of the Persian rug until I was standing a few feet away from the roaring flames. The heat of the fire warmed my back, but it was nothing compared to the burning intensity of the two women watching me. Scarlett glided across the room with the fluid, silent grace of a predator. She stopped directly in front of me, entirely ignoring the concept of personal space. She handed me a fresh glass of bourbon. Our fingers brushed, and a jolt of electricity sparked between us. "Drink," Scarlett commanded softly, a wicked smile playing on her lips. I took a sip, the liquid burning smoothly down my throat. "You said you were going to tell me what you want," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Why am I here? You don't know me. I'm nobody." A sudden, sharp laugh echoed through the quiet room. It was Victoria. She set her glass down on the side table with a definitive clink and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "That is where you are entirely wrong, Olivia," Victoria said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "We know exactly who you are. We do not believe in coincidences in our line of work. And you wandering into our lounge tonight was an act of fate." I frowned, my confusion mounting. "What are you talking about?" "Olivia Mercer," Victoria stated calmly, reading my life like a dossier. 26 years old. Junior architect at Vanguard Designs. Graduated top of your class from Columbia. You have an unparalleled eye for structural integrity, load-bearing vulnerabilities, and security integration. My blood ran cold. My jaw literally dropped. "How do you know my firm? How do you know my last name?" Scarlett stepped behind me. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, her breath ghosting over the sensitive skin of my exposed neck. "Because, little bird," Scarlett whispered into my ear, sending a violent shiver down my spine, "we own Vanguard Designs. We bought out the controlling shares 3 months ago through a shell corporation. Your boss, Mr. Henderson, answers directly to us," Victoria continued, standing up slowly. She walked toward me, her towering height incredibly intimidating. "We have been monitoring your work, Olivia. You recently finished the security blueprints for the new downtown high-rise. A high-rise commissioned by the Falcone family. The Falcones, the only other syndicate in Chicago powerful enough to rival the Rossis. Even I, a civilian, knew that name. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I had unwittingly designed a building for a Mafia war. "We were planning to bring you in next week," Victoria said, stopping just inches in front of me. Now I was entirely trapped between the two sisters. Victoria's icy gaze locked with mine, while Scarlett's hands gently came to rest on my hips from behind. "We needed to know the vulnerabilities of the Falcone building. We needed you to tell us." "But then," Scarlett murmured, her thumbs slowly tracing circles on the silk covering my hips, "tonight happened. We saw you in the lounge. Broken. Shivering. Betrayed by a woman who doesn't possess a fraction of the worth to stand beside you. Your value as an architect was what caught our attention," Victoria said, reaching out to gently tilt my chin up with 2 perfectly manicured fingers, forcing me to maintain eye contact with her. But seeing you tonight, that changed the nature of our acquisition. Acquisition? I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. You are brilliant, Olivia. But you have been wasting your life living in a mediocre apartment with a cheating coward, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a hypnotic, commanding murmur. We are offering you an alternative. Scarlett leaned closer, pressing her chest flush against my back, her lips brushing the shell of my ear. We are offering you protection, little bird. Wealth. Power. Place in our empire. You give us the blueprints, and you belong to us. We will make sure that Emma and anyone else who has ever hurt you never speaks your name again. And if I say no? I choked out, genuinely terrified of the answer. Victoria's thumb softly stroked my jawline, a terrifying, beautiful contrast of gentleness and pure lethal intent. You are a smart girl, Olivia, Victoria whispered. Look around you. Do you really think you are ever leaving this house? End of Part 3. Part 4, The Point of No Return. The silence in the library was absolute, save for the crackling of the massive stone fireplace. The heat of the flames washed over my front, while the intoxicating dark warmth of Scarlett's body pressed flush against my back. Victoria's icy blue eyes held mine in a vice-like grip, her thumb still resting against my jawline. Do you really think you are ever leaving this house? Her words echoed in my mind, ringing like a death knell to the life I had known just a few hours ago. I was Olivia Mercer, a girl who paid her taxes on time, who bought organic coffee, who had planned to propose to her cheating girlfriend by the end of the year. Now I was standing in a silk slip dress, sandwiched between two Mafia queens who owned my company, my career, and apparently my future. I should have been screaming. I should have been fighting, clawing at them, demanding my freedom. But the most terrifying realization was slowly blooming in the center of my chest. I didn't want to. For 3 years I had played it safe. I had built a comfortable, boring, predictable life with Emma, only to have it violently shattered. Being a good girl had gotten me nothing but a broken heart and a walk in the freezing rain. Standing here, enveloped in the raw, unapologetic power of the Rossi sisters, a dark, suppressed part of my soul was suddenly wide awake. My voice trembled, and I swallowed hard, trying to maintain eye contact with Victoria despite the heavy, hypnotic rhythm of Scarlett's thumbs tracing circles on my hips. I don't even have the blueprints. They are on a secure server at Vanguard. It requires biometric clearance. A slow, devastatingly beautiful smile curved Victoria's lips. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the trap snap shut. She dropped her hand from my jaw, taking a slow step back, though her eyes never left mine. We are well aware of Vanguard's security protocols, Olivia, Victoria said, walking over to the heavy oak desk on the far side of the library. In fact, we anticipated it. She tapped a few keys on a sleek laptop sitting on the desk. The massive, floor-to-ceiling bookshelf on the right side of the room suddenly clicked. With a low mechanical hum, the entire shelf slid open, revealing a hidden, state-of-the-art command center. Screens glowed in the darkness, displaying live feeds of the city's secure financial networks and the internal server dashboard of Vanguard Designs. Scarlett let out a soft, dark chuckle, her breath hot against my neck. You really think a corporate firewall could keep us out, little bird? We don't just break doors down. We buy the building and change the locks. Scarlett finally stepped away from me, the sudden loss of her body heat making me shiver in my silk dress. She walked over to join her sister, pouring herself another glass of bourbon. We already bypassed the external encryption. But the internal files, the specific structural weak points of the Falcone high-rise, are locked behind your personal encrypted architectural key. We need you to open the door. I stood frozen on the Persian rug. This was it. Precipice. If I logged in, if I handed over the vulnerabilities of a skyscraper belonging to a rival mafia family, I was committing corporate espionage. I was making myself an accessory to whatever violent, destructive plans the Rossis had. There would be no going back to drawing residential homes and coffee shops. And if I do this, I said, my voice finally finding some strength. I crossed my arms over my chest, a weak attempt to shield myself from their piercing gazes. If I give you the Falcone files, what happens to me? I become your prisoner. Victoria leaned against the heavy oak desk, crossing her long legs. A prisoner is kept in a cell against their will, Olivia. You are not a prisoner. You are an investment. A highly valued asset. And a very beautiful one, Scarlett chimed in, taking a slow sip of her bourbon as she eyed the plunge of my emerald dress. You will live here in this estate. You will have anything you could possibly desire. A private studio. Clothes. Cars. Protection. No one will ever touch you, speak down to you, or hurt you again without our explicit permission. And believe me, we do not give permission. You belong to us now, Victoria stated, her tone laced with an absolute terrifying certainty. The world outside these gates is a dangerous, chaotic place for a woman with a target on her back. And once the Falcones realize their blueprints have been compromised, you will have a target on your back. We are the only ones who can keep you safe. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were creating the very danger they were promising to protect me from. But as I looked at Victoria's cold, calculated dominance and Scarlett's fiery, protective obsession, I knew they weren't lying about keeping me safe. They would burn the city to the ground before they let anyone touch something they claimed as theirs. Emma, I blurted out. The name felt like ash in my mouth. She knows about Vanguard. She knows my routines. If she goes to the police... Scarlett's eyes darkened instantly, all traces of amusement vanishing. She set her glass down with a sharp thud. Do not concern yourself with that pathetic excuse of a woman. Emma is currently sitting in your apartment, frantically trying to call a phone that is sitting at the bottom of a storm drain. By tomorrow morning, her lease will be terminated. Her bank accounts will be inexplicably frozen. She will be too busy fighting for her own survival to worry about where you are. A vicious, ugly sense of satisfaction curled in my stomach. I hated myself for feeling it, but the thought of Emma suffering, even a fraction of the agony she had put me through, felt like justice. I was changing. The corruption of the Rossi sisters was already seeping into my veins. I walked toward the hidden command center. My bare feet made no sound on the thick rugs. I stopped in front of the glowing monitors. The login screen for Vanguard's deepest server blinked back at me, waiting for my credentials. Victoria and Scarlett stood on either side of me. The scent of ozone and dark cherry wrapped around me, a suffocating, intoxicating cocoon. Do it, little bird, Scarlett whispered, her hand coming to rest on my lower back, her fingers slipping just a fraction of an inch beneath the silk of my dress, resting directly against my bare skin. Touch sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to my core. I raised my trembling hands to the keyboard. I typed in my private architect ID. I entered the 24-character encryption password I had memorized. Access granted. The screen flashed green, and hundreds of highly classified blueprints, structural schematics, and load-bearing algorithms flooded the monitors. The Falcone high-rise, stripped bare of all its secrets. Magnificent, Victoria breathed. She leaned over me, her chest brushing my shoulder, her eyes scanning the data with the speed and precision of a supercomputer. Look at this, Scarlett. The underground parking structure. The reinforced pillars don't extend past the subbasement. It's a massive structural flaw. A flaw we can exploit, Scarlett purred, a wicked, dangerous thrill in her voice. She turned her head, her lips inches from my cheek. You are brilliant, Olivia. You just handed us the keys to the Falcone Empire. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had done it. I had crossed the line. The terrifying reality of my actions crashed over me, leaving me breathless. You did well, Victoria said softly. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her icy gaze softening into something that looked dangerously close to affection. You must be exhausted. It has been a traumatic night. Come, Scarlett commanded gently, her hands sliding from my lower back to interlock with my fingers. Let's get you back to bed. You need to sleep. Tomorrow your real life begins. I didn't resist as they led me away from the glowing screens, out of the library, and back through the silent, heavily guarded corridors of the estate. I was in a daze, floating in a surreal bubble of silk, danger, and unimaginable wealth. When we reached the East Wing Master Suite, Scarlett pushed the heavy doors open. The room was lit only by the soft glow of the fireplace and a few strategically placed lamps. The massive, silk-draped bed looked like an absolute sanctuary. "Sleep, Olivia," Victoria said from the doorway, her towering silhouette cutting a striking figure in the dim light. "Maria will bring you breakfast in the morning. Do not attempt to leave the suite without an escort." "I won't," I whispered, holding the edges of my silk robe tightly together. Scarlett lingered inside the room for a moment longer. She walked up to me, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating from her leather pants. She reached out, her fingertips gently tracing the collarbone exposed by the deep cut of my dress. "You belong to us now, little bird," Scarlett murmured, her dark eyes flashing with a possessive, consuming fire. "Never forget that." Before I could reply, she leaned in and pressed her lips softly against the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a full kiss, but the ghost of it, the brief, burning contact of her lips against my skin, was enough to send my mind spiraling into absolute chaos. Scarlett pulled away with a satisfied smirk, turned on her heel, and walked out, closing the heavy double doors behind her with a definitive click. I stood alone in the center of the massive room, the phantom heat of her kiss still burning on my skin. I was a prisoner in a velvet cage, held captive by two of the most dangerous women in the world. And as I crawled into the massive, luxurious bed, surrounded by the scent of their power and protection, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I didn't want to be rescued. End of Part 4. Part 5, The Architect of Ruin. I woke up to the sound of absolute, pristine silence. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. I reached out instinctively across the massive mattress, expecting my hand to brush against the familiar, worn cotton of my apartment's cheap sheets. Instead, my fingers grazed a sea of heavy, immaculate silk. My eyes snapped open, and the memories of the previous night crashed into my consciousness like a freight train. The rain, the betrayal, the club, the Rossi sisters, the blueprints. I sat up, the emerald silk slip dress pooling around my waist. The morning sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the East Wing Master Suite, casting long, golden geometric shadows across the mahogany floor. It was a beautiful, crisp Chicago morning. In my old life, I would be frantically rushing to the subway, clutching a lukewarm coffee, dreading a brutal performance review. Today, I was waking up in the fortress of the city's most lethal crime syndicate, having just committed high-level corporate treason. A soft, polite knock echoed through the massive bedroom, instantly spiking my pulse. Before I could even formulate a response, the heavy double doors opened and Maria stepped inside. She pushed an elegant silver serving cart that smelled heavenly, freshly roasted espresso, warm croissants, and sliced fruit. "Good morning, Miss Mercer," Maria said, her tone as perfectly neutral as it had been the night before. She wheeled the cart toward a small glass dining table near the windows. "I trust you slept well." Yes. "Thank you, Maria," I managed to say, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Plush Persian rug was incredibly soft against my bare feet. "Miss Victoria and Miss Scarlett are currently handling business in the solarium. They have requested your presence once you are dressed and have eaten," Maria continued. She walked over to the sprawling walk-in closet and retrieved a garment bag, hanging it meticulously on a velvet valet stand. "I have prepared your wardrobe for the day. Please ring the bell on the nightstand when you are ready for an escort." Without waiting for a reply, she bowed her head and exited, leaving me alone with the breakfast and the mysterious garment bag. My stomach growled violently, reminding me that I hadn't eaten anything since lunch the day before, The red velvet cupcakes I had bought for Emma were likely still smeared on our apartment floor. I poured myself a cup of the dark, rich espresso and took a bite of a croissant. It was perfect. Everything in this house was suffocatingly perfect. After eating, I approached the valet stand. I unzipped the garment bag with trembling hands. I had fully expected another silk dress or something equally scandalous and restrictive. But the Rossi sisters, it seemed, understood the psychology of power better than anyone. Inside was a tailored, immaculate three-piece suit in a deep, midnight charcoal gray. It was made of a fabric so fine it felt like liquid under my fingertips. There was a crisp, white silk blouse to go beneath it, and a pair of black, pointed-toe stilettos that looked sharp enough to draw blood. It wasn't a captive's outfit. It was armor. They were dressing me not as a pet, but as an equal. Or at least a highly valued executive in their terrifying enterprise. I showered quickly, the hot water washing away the last remnants of my lingering fatigue. When I put the suit on, it fit with the same uncanny bespoke perfection as the emerald dress. I looked at myself in the full-length vanity mirror. My hair fell in soft, dark waves around my shoulders, framing a face that looked fundamentally different from the girl who had cried in the rain last night. The cut of the suit accentuated my posture, making me stand taller. The sharp lapels and the deep charcoal fabric made my eyes look darker, more intense. I looked dangerous. I looked like I belonged here. I rang the small silver bell on the nightstand. Within seconds, a massive guard in a black suit opened the door, gesturing politely for me to follow. He led me through the labyrinthine corridors of the estate, past priceless paintings and heavily armed sentries, until we reached a set of glass French doors bathed in sunlight. The solarium was a breathtaking room, essentially a massive greenhouse filled with exotic, blooming orchids, trailing ivy, and a sprawling marble table in the center. The air was warm, humid, and thick with the scent of damp earth and sweet flowers. Victoria and Scarlett sat at opposite ends of the marble table. Contrast between them was striking in the daylight. Victoria wore a pristine white turtleneck and tailored slacks, her platinum blonde hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. She was typing rapidly on a sleek tablet, surrounded by stacks of financial dossiers. She looked like a ruthless Wall Street CEO. Scarlett, on the other hand, lounged in her chair with a feral, lazy grace. She wore a dark crimson blazer over a black lace bralette, her dark hair falling in messy, beautiful waves over her shoulders. She was casually cleaning a silver-plated, compact, semi-automatic pistol with a silk cloth. When I walked in, both of their heads snapped up. Silence descended over the solarium. The heavy thud of my stilettos against the marble floor was the only sound in the room. A slow, wicked grin spread across Scarlett's face. She set the pistol down on the marble table, her dark eyes raking over my tailored suit with blatant, consuming hunger. "Well, damn," she breathed, leaning forward on her elbows. "I knew we had a good eye, Victoria. But this is a masterpiece." Victoria's icy blue eyes swept over me, analytical and piercing. A faint, approving smirk touched the corner of her mouth. "You look formidable, Olivia. Sit down." I took the chair situated directly between them. The proximity to Scarlett's weapon sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins, but I forced my hands to remain steady as I rested them on the cool marble. "Did you sleep?" Victoria asked, sliding a fresh cup of tea toward me. "I did," I replied, my voice steady. Though I'm still trying to process the fact that I'm currently wearing a suit that probably costs more than my student loans, sitting in a Mafia fortress. Scarlett laughed, a bright, dangerous sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Oh, little bird, you have no idea how much that suit costs. But don't worry about loans anymore. Your debts have been zeroed out." My head snapped toward her. "What?" Victoria tapped her tablet, bringing up a secure banking interface. She slid it across the table toward me. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, all of your financial liabilities have been erased. Student loans, credit cards, your car payment. You now have a private account with a substantial signing bonus for your consulting work on the Falcone project." I stared at the screen. The number staring back at me had 7 figures. My breath caught in my throat. It was blood money. I knew that. But the sheer, staggering weight of financial freedom instantly crushed any lingering moral objections. "And Emma?" I asked, hating how my voice faltered slightly at the name but needing to know. Victoria's expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. "Your former partner had a very difficult morning. She attempted to use her debit card to buy a coffee at 7:30 a.m. It was declined. When she called her bank, she was informed that her accounts had been frozen pending a federal investigation into wire fraud." Scarlett picked up her pistol again, checking the chamber with a satisfying click. Her landlord also served her with an immediate eviction notice due to unforeseen breach of contract. She is currently packing her bags. She will be out of the city by nightfall, assuming she has the cash for a bus ticket. They had utterly dismantled her life in less than 12 hours. The sheer, terrifying power the Rossi sisters wielded was absolute. Part of me was horrified. But the darker, broken part of me, the part that had stood in the rain while Emma slept with someone else, felt a rush of pure, vindictive satisfaction. "Thank you," I whispered, and I meant it. Victoria leaned back in her chair, steepling her long fingers. "Do not thank us yet, Olivia. You earned your keep last night, but the game is far from over. We have analyzed the blueprints you provided." With a swipe of her finger, the financial screen on the tablet vanished, replaced by the highly detailed, complex schematics of the Falcone high-rise I had decrypted the night before. "You pointed out the structural vulnerability in the sub-basement," Victoria continued, her voice slipping into a cold, tactical register. "The reinforced pillars don't extend past the parking garage. The Falcones are building a massive, fortified vault down there to store untraceable bearer bonds and offshore servers." "We want to hit it," Scarlett interrupted, her eyes flashing with a violent, beautiful excitement. "We want to crack the vault and bleed them dry before the building even opens to the public." I leaned over the tablet, the familiar lines of the architectural software grounding me. This was my domain. I was no longer a lost girl. I was an expert. "Hitting the vault is suicide," I stated firmly, pointing to a cluster of red lines indicating load-bearing walls. "If you try to blow the vault doors using conventional explosives, the shockwave will travel up the unreinforced pillars. You won't just break the vault, you'll collapse the entire lower quadrant of the building. You'll bring a 60-story skyscraper down on your own heads." Scarlett's smile faded, replaced by a deadly serious pout. "So, what are you saying, architect? That it's impenetrable?" "Nothing is impenetrable if you know where the stress points are," I murmured, my eyes scanning the blueprints. A plan was already forming in my mind, a dark, brilliant puzzle. "You don't go through the doors. You go through the foundation." Victoria's eyes narrowed, a spark of genuine respect igniting in her icy gaze. "Explain." "The city's old subway tunnels," I said, zooming in on the schematic's lowest elevation. "There is an abandoned, sealed-off service tunnel that runs exactly 12 feet beneath the foundation of the Falcone vault. When we surveyed the land, we had to pour extra concrete to stabilize the ground above it. But the concrete is standard industrial grade. It's not reinforced steel." I looked up, meeting Victoria's intense gaze, then Scarlett's wide, thrilled eyes. "If you use a focused thermal cutting charge, not an explosive but something that burns straight up, you can melt through the floor of the vault from beneath," I said, the adrenaline pumping fast and hard through my veins. "No shockwave. No structural collapse. You drop the contents of the vault right down into the subway tunnel, load it onto a rail cart, and vanish before their security sensors even register a breach." Absolute silence descended upon the solarium. The only sound was the gentle rustling of the orchid leaves in the filtered air conditioning. Scarlett stared at me, her chest rising and falling heavily. She slowly set the pistol down and stood up from her chair. She walked around the large marble table, her eyes locked onto mine, burning with a mix of awe and a deeply possessive desire. She stopped right behind my chair. She leaned down, her arms wrapping loosely around my shoulders, her chin resting right next to my ear. "Victoria," Scarlett whispered, her breath hot and intoxicating against my neck. "I think I am in love." Victoria didn't smile, but the coldness in her eyes completely melted away, replaced by a terrifying, absolute approval. She looked at me not as a pawn, but as a queen on her chessboard. "You are a very dangerous woman, Olivia Mercer," Victoria said smoothly, picking up her espresso cup. "It seems we acquired you just in time." I leaned back slightly into Scarlett's embrace, the heat of her body a perfect counterpoint to Victoria's cold praise. My old life was dead. Emma was a ghost. The innocent architect was gone. I looked at the blueprints of the rival Mafia's fortress, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly alive. "So," I said, a dark smirk finally playing on my own lips, "when do we start digging?" End of Part 5. Part 6, The Armory and the Acceleration. The solarium seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath of my proposal. The sweet, damp scent of the orchids was suddenly overpowered by the sharp, metallic tang of pure adrenaline. I had just drawn a roadmap to the greatest heist in Chicago's underground history, and the two most dangerous women in the city were looking at me as if I had just reinvented fire. Victoria stood up smoothly, abandoning her half-finished espresso. "If we are going to breach the foundation from the abandoned subway tunnels, we need specific coordinates. We cannot afford to be off by a single inch, or the thermal charges will hit the reinforced pylons and bring the building down anyway." "I can give you the exact coordinates," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I designed the structural grid. I know exactly where the blind spots are." "Good," Victoria said, her icy eyes gleaming with a terrifying, tactical brilliance. She turned to her sister. "Scarlett, take our architect down to the armory. Outfit her. If she is going to be part of this operation, she needs to understand the tools of our trade. I need to make some calls and secure the thermal charges." Scarlett's smile widened, a feral, beautiful thing that made my breath catch. "My pleasure, sister." She unhooked her arms from around my neck, though she let her fingertips trail deliberately down the lapel of my bespoke charcoal suit before stepping away. "Come along, little bird. Let's go see what kind of claws you have." I followed Scarlett out of the sunlit solarium, leaving Victoria to her secure phone calls. We descended a hidden, spiral iron staircase tucked behind a false wall in the estate's sprawling library. Temperature dropped noticeably with every step, the opulent aesthetic of the mansion fading into smooth, reinforced concrete and raw steel. The heavy steel door at the bottom of the stairs required Scarlett to press her palm against a biometric scanner. With a heavy, pneumatic hiss, the door slid open. I stepped inside and instantly stopped dead in my tracks. The armory was the size of a commercial warehouse. Racks upon racks of high-grade tactical equipment, automatic rifles, body armor, and explosives lined the walls. Several men and women in dark, tactical gear were cleaning weapons or sparring on heavy mats in the corner. When Scarlett walked in, every single one of them stopped what they were doing and snapped to attention, their eyes fixed firmly on the floor in a show of absolute respect. "At ease," Scarlett commanded, not even bothering to look at them. She walked straight past the heavy artillery and guided me toward a glass display case at the far end of the room. It housed an array of sleek, compact handguns. "You are a creature of intellect, Olivia," Scarlett murmured, unlocking the case with a small silver key she pulled from her lace bralette. "Your mind is your greatest weapon. But in our world, intellect needs a physical insurance policy." She reached into the case and pulled out a matte black, compact 9mm pistol. It looked incredibly deadly and far too heavy for its size. Scarlett turned to me, holding the weapon out. "Take it," she instructed gently. I hesitated. I had never touched a gun in my life. I drew buildings. I designed safe spaces for people to live and work. The cold metal in Scarlett's hand represented the exact opposite of everything I had ever known. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Emma had killed her last night. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the grip. It was cold, heavy, and terrifyingly real. Scarlett stepped in close, instantly eliminating the space between us. She stood behind me just as she had in the library, but this time her touch was firm, instructive. She reached around me, her warm hands covering mine, adjusting my grip on the weapon. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you are absolutely ready to destroy whatever is in front of you," she whispered, her cheek pressed against mine. Her dark hair cascaded over my shoulder, smelling of smoke and expensive cherry perfume. "Feet shoulder-width apart. Balance your weight." She kicked my ankle lightly with her stiletto, forcing me to widen my stance. Her body pressed flush against my back, guiding my arms as I raised the empty weapon toward a paper target at the far end of the underground range. "You hold the power of life and death in your hands right now, little bird," Scarlett purred, her voice a husky rumble that vibrated through my entire body. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," I admitted, my voice slightly breathless. "Good," she replied, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "Fear keeps you sharp, but do not let it paralyze you. You are a Rossi asset now. Anyone who looks at you with intent to harm is already a dead man. You just have to pull the trigger to finalize the paperwork." The dark, twisted poetry of her words sent a shiver down my spine. I was standing in a Mafia armory, holding a gun, wrapped in the arms of a syndicate boss, and I had never felt more protected in my entire life. Suddenly, the heavy pneumatic door hissed open again. Victoria strode into the armory, her platinum blonde hair still perfectly in place, but the icy calm in her eyes had been replaced by a sharp, aggressive intensity. "Change of plans," Victoria announced, her voice echoing loudly through the massive room. Every mercenary in the armory instantly froze, awaiting her command. Scarlett slowly lowered my arms, though she didn't step away from me. "What is it, sister?" "I just intercepted a transmission from the Falcone's chief of security," Victoria said, walking briskly toward us. "They aren't waiting for the building to officially open. The federal task force is closing in on their offshore accounts. They are moving the untraceable bearer bonds and the physical servers into the sub-basement vault tonight." Scarlett's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam igniting in the darkness of her irises. "Tonight? The vault doors aren't even fully calibrated yet." "Exactly," Victoria replied, her mind visibly working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "They are relying on brute force. They are putting 50 armed guards in the lobby and the underground parking structure. But the subway tunnels beneath the foundation will be completely empty," I finished for her, my architectural brain automatically visualizing the schematics. "They won't think to guard a sealed, abandoned transit line. They don't even know it directly intersects the weak point of their foundation." "Precisely," Victoria said, stopping in front of us. She looked at me, her blue eyes piercing right through my soul. "We are moving the timeline up. We hit them tonight, at exactly 2 a.m. when the shift change occurs and their security grid is at its most vulnerable." Scarlett turned me around to face her, her hands resting firmly on my shoulders. "Can you map the coordinates for the thermal charges in time?" "I don't need to map them," I said, a sudden reckless surge of confidence washing over me. "The concrete thickness varies by the millimeter down there due to the soil erosion. If your demolition team places the charges even slightly off-center, it won't melt through. It will deflect and blow the charges back in their faces." Victoria's jaw clenched. "Then how do we ensure accuracy?" I took a deep breath, looking back and forth between the two terrifying, beautiful women who had completely derailed my existence. "You take me with you," I said firmly. Scarlett's hands tightened on my shoulders, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. Victoria stared at me in stunned silence for a fraction of a second before her expression smoothed out into a look of absolute, chilling respect. "Absolutely not," Scarlett growled, her protective instincts instantly flaring up. "It's a hot zone, Olivia. If the Falcones catch wind of us in the tunnels, it will turn into a bloodbath. You are an architect, not a soldier. You stay here behind reinforced steel where it is safe." If I stay here, your crew goes in blind, I countered, stepping closer to Scarlett, refusing to back down from the fire in her eyes. I know the structural integrity of that building better than the man who poured the concrete. I know how the material reacts to heat. If I am down there, I can guide the thermal cutters in real time. I can get you exactly where you need to be. I turned to Victoria, appealing to her cold logic. You want the Falcone Empire to fall tonight, Victoria? Then you need me in those tunnels. Victoria studied me for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the armory was suffocating. Finally, a slow, dangerous smile curved the Ice Queen's lips. She is right, Scarlett, Victoria said quietly. Her real-time analysis is the difference between cracking the vault and burying our crew under 1,000 tons of rubble. Victoria, if she gets hurt, Scarlett started, her voice laced with a rare, genuine panic. I will not let her get hurt, Victoria interrupted, her tone brokering absolutely no argument. She looked at me, her gaze heavy with a terrifying promise. I will be with her in the tunnels. You will lead the extraction team at the surface. Scarlett looked like she wanted to tear the concrete walls down with her bare hands, but she knew better than to argue with her sister's logic. She turned back to me, her dark eyes entirely consumed by a fierce, possessive storm. She reached up, cupping my face with both hands, entirely ignoring the 50 armed mercenaries watching us. Her thumbs swept over my cheekbones, her touch branding me. If anything happens to you down there, little bird, Scarlett whispered fiercely, her lips hovering mere inches from mine, I will not just kill the Falcones. I will burn this entire city to the ground. I'll be fine, I whispered back, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could feel it through my tailored suit. I'm with you now. Scarlett closed the distance, pressing a hard, bruising, entirely unapologetic kiss to my lips. Tasted like danger, whiskey, and absolute ownership. When she pulled away, my head was spinning, and every lingering doubt I had about my old life was permanently incinerated. Victoria walked over to a steel locker, pulling out a sleek, black Kevlar vest. She tossed it onto the glass display case next to my newly acquired pistol. Get out of the bespoke suit, Olivia, Victoria ordered, her voice vibrating with the thrill of impending war. We have a vault to break. End of Part 6. Part 7, The Tunnels of Treason. Charcoal bespoke suit, which had made me feel like an untouchable corporate queen just an hour ago, felt suddenly restrictive as I peeled it off in the armory's private locker room. In its place, I pulled on black tactical cargo pants and a tight-fitting, moisture-wicking black undershirt. Over that, Victoria personally fastened the heavy, matte black Kevlar vest around my torso. The weight of it was a shocking, physical reminder that I was no longer drafting blueprints on a screen. I was walking into a war zone. Scarlett stood by the reinforced door, her arms crossed over her crimson blazer, her dark eyes tracking my every movement. The playful, seductive predator from the solarium was gone, replaced entirely by a tense, violently protective syndicate boss preparing for a siege. You stay right on my sister's 6, Scarlett ordered, her voice a low, gravelly command that left no room for negotiation. She pushed off the wall and closed the distance between us, her hands reaching out to adjust the straps of my vest, pulling me flush against her. You don't wander. You don't try to be a hero. You give them the math and you let the guns do the talking. Understood. Understood, I breathed, looking up into her stormy eyes. She leaned down and pressed a hard, lingering kiss to my forehead. It was surprisingly tender for a woman who could order a city block leveled with a single phone call. I'll be watching this surface. If even a single Falcone guard looks at the pavement wrong, I'm turning the lobby into a graveyard. I will see you on the other side, little bird. With a final, lingering look, Scarlett turned and swept out of the armory, a squad of heavily armed mercenaries trailing behind her like shadows. Victoria stepped into my line of sight, instantly commanding my attention. She wore a sleek black tactical trench coat over her own body armor, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight, severe braid. She looked like an icy, beautiful angel of death. Time to go, architect, Victoria said coolly. She handed me a tactical earpiece. put this in. Keep your channel open at all times. And keep your weapon holstered unless I explicitly tell you otherwise. I nodded, sliding the earpiece in. We moved out, flanked by a specialized 6-man demolition crew carrying heavy steel crates of thermal lances and cutting gear. We didn't take the luxurious SUVs. Instead, we piled into the back of a rusted, unmarked utility van that smelled of ozone and stale cigarette smoke. The ride was agonizingly tense. The city lights of Chicago blurred past the heavily tinted windows as we navigated toward the industrial district. I sat wedged between Victoria and a mountain of a man holding a modified assault rifle. Contrast between my old life and this very moment was so sharp it almost made me dizzy. Just 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether Emma would like the cupcakes I bought. Now, I was calculating the exact thermal output required to melt a billionaire's vault without collapsing a 60-story skyscraper. Victoria sat perfectly still beside me, her posture immaculate despite the bumpy ride. While Scarlett's presence was like standing next to a roaring bonfire, Victoria was a glacier, cold, imposing, and breathtakingly dangerous. She turned her head slightly, her piercing blue eyes locking onto mine in the dim light of the van. "Are you afraid, Olivia?" she asked, her voice a soft, steady hum over the rumble of the engine. "Yes," I answered honestly. "But not of you." A faint, approving smirk ghosted across her lips. She reached out, her gloved fingers lightly resting over mine on the metal bench. It was a minuscule gesture, but coming from the Ice Queen, it felt like an earth-shattering declaration of protection. Fear is a biological imperative. Keeps you alive. But panic will get you killed. Focus your mind on the concrete, the steel, and the angles. I will handle the blood. The van screeched to a halt. The back doors flew open, revealing the absolute darkness of an abandoned railway service yard. We moved quickly and silently. Victoria led the way, her tactical flashlight cutting a sharp beam through the dusty air. We approached a massive, rusted iron grate set into the concrete ground. Two of the mercenaries hoisted it open with a heavy grunt. "Down," Victoria ordered. We descended a rusted iron ladder, dropping 30 feet beneath the surface of the city into the forgotten subterranean labyrinth of Chicago's old transit lines. The air down here was thick, damp, and smelled of ancient dirt and standing water. The absolute darkness was suffocating, pushed back only by the tactical lights mounted to the cruise rifles. I pulled out the specialized sonar tablet Victoria had provided me. The screen glowed with the complex, multi-layered blueprints of the Falcone high-rise towering somewhere far above our heads. "We need to head north for half a mile," I whispered, my voice echoing eerily off the curved brick walls of the tunnel. The vault is situated directly beneath the structural center of the tower. We have to walk directly under the main foundation slab. We moved in total silence. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath our boots and the steady dripping of condensation from the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give away our position. As we walked, I kept my eyes glued to the tablet, tracking our geographical coordinates relative to the architectural grid above us. "Hold," I commanded softly, raising my hand. The entire crew froze instantly. Victoria stepped to my side, her shoulder brushing against mine. "Are we here?" I looked up at the curved, brick-lined ceiling of the tunnel. It looked exactly like the rest of the dark passage. But according to the math, right above those bricks was 10 feet of industrial concrete, and above that, the steel floor of the Falcone Syndicate's multi-million-dollar vault. "This is it," I said, tapping the screen. Directly above us. Coordinates align perfectly with the blind spot in their security mesh. If you cut a circular hole exactly 6 feet in diameter, you will completely bypass the load-bearing pylons. Victoria signaled her men. "Set the lances. We have exactly 20 minutes before the Falcone surface guards do their perimeter sweep." The demolition crew sprang into action. They unpacked the thermal lances, heavy, cylindrical devices that looked terrifyingly complex. They erected a collapsible steel scaffold directly beneath the target area. I stepped closer to the scaffolding, my eyes scanning the brick ceiling. A sudden, sharp realization hit me like a physical blow. The bricks weren't uniform. There was a subtle, almost invisible sag in the masonry right in the center of our target zone. "Wait!" I hissed, grabbing the arm of the lead demolition expert just as he was about to ignite the first thermal charge. The mercenary tensed, his hand instantly dropping to his sidearm, but Victoria was there in a flash. She stepped between us, her blue eyes flashing dangerously. "What is it, Olivia?" "Look at the masonry," I said, my voice urgent, pointing my flashlight at the ceiling. "The bricks are bowing slightly. That means the soil erosion between the tunnel and the foundation is worse than the geological surveys indicated. The concrete above us isn't 10 feet thick, it's thicker. They must have poured extra to compensate for the settling." Victoria's jaw clenched. "How much thicker?" "At least 3 feet, I calculated frantically. "If you run the lances at the standard temperature, it will take 40 minutes to melt through. We don't have 40 minutes. And if the heat pools in the excess concrete, it will expand violently. It will fracture the adjacent load-bearing pylons. Can you adjust the thermal output to compensate?" Victoria demanded, her tone icy and razor-sharp. "I can. But it's risky," I said, my hands flying over the tablet, rapidly crunching the thermodynamic equations. "I have to override the safety limiters on the lances. We have to burn it 3 times hotter. It will melt the concrete in 10 minutes, but the ambient heat in this tunnel is going to skyrocket. And the molten slag, it's going to pour down like a waterfall." "Do it," Victoria commanded without a second of hesitation. I stepped up to the control console connected to the lances. My fingers flew across the keypad, bypassing the factory safety settings, cranking the thermal output to a level that would turn sand into glass in seconds. "Everyone back up," I shouted. I hit the ignition. A blinding, brilliant blue light erupted from the lances, instantly illuminating the pitch-black tunnel with the intensity of a dying star. The roar of the thermal energy was deafening, a high-pitched scream of vaporizing material. The heat hit us like a physical wall. Within seconds, I was sweating through my tactical gear. I stared up through the specialized tinted goggles one of the men handed me. The brick ceiling instantly turned black, then cherry red, then violently, blindingly white. "It's working!" I yelled over the roar. Concrete above the bricks began to liquefy. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring sight. Gravity took hold, and thick, glowing drops of molten slag began to rain down onto the tunnel floor, hissing and spitting as they hit the damp gravel. Temperature in the tunnel was becoming unbearable. Suddenly, a massive chunk of glowing, semi-solid concrete broke loose from the ceiling, plummeting straight down toward the scaffolding control console where I was standing. I froze, my brain unable to process the falling danger fast enough. But Victoria moved with the speed of a striking viper. She lunged forward, her arms wrapping tightly around my waist, tackling me hard to the ground just as the molten rock crashed onto the console, vaporizing the electronics in a shower of sparks. We hit the damp gravel floor, Victoria taking the brunt of the impact. Her heavy trench coat shielded me as a wave of intense heat and ash washed over us. For a breathless second, I lay pinned beneath her. I looked up, my eyes wide behind the tinted goggles. Victoria was hovering over me, her face inches from mine. Her icy blue eyes were wide, her breathing heavy and ragged. In the blinding, chaotic blue light of the thermal lances, she looked terrifyingly beautiful. "Are you injured?" she demanded, her voice a fierce, breathless rasp that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "No," I gasped, the proximity of her body making my pulse race even faster than the near-death experience. "I'm okay." She didn't move away immediately. Her gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, the cold, calculating syndicate boss entirely eclipsed by something much darker and far more visceral. But before the moment could escalate, a massive, groaning crack echoed above us. We both looked up. Concrete foundation had completely melted away. The glowing, white-hot edges of the hole revealed the thick, reinforced steel floor of the Falcone vault. "The steel!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet, Victoria pulling me up beside her. "The lances will cut through the steel in 60 seconds. The mercenaries scrambled, avoiding the puddles of molten slag, readying the heavy chains and hydraulic catch nets. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the floor of the vault gave way. A perfectly circular 6-foot chunk of glowing steel plummeted into the tunnel, hitting the gravel with an earth-shaking thud. Above us, the interior of the Falcone vault was exposed. It was pitch black inside, save for the blinking green lights of massive offshore server racks and heavy reinforced lockboxes. The air conditioning from the vault rushed down into the superheated tunnel, creating a swirling vortex of steam. "Secure the servers. Hook the lockboxes. We have 5 minutes before the pressure drop triggers the secondary alarms." Victoria roared, her absolute command restoring order to the chaos. The men fired grappling hooks up through the hole, attaching hydraulic winches to the massive server racks containing the Falcone's entire digital financial empire. They began lowering them down into the tunnel. It was working. We were actually doing it. I had designed the blueprint for their ruin, and it was playing out perfectly. But then the tactical earpiece in my ear crackled violently with static. "Victoria! Olivia! Do you copy?" Scarlett's voice tore through the comms. She didn't sound confident. She sounded breathless, frantic, and drowned out by the unmistakable sound of heavy automatic gunfire. Victoria pressed her hand to her earpiece, her face instantly turning to stone. "Scarlett, report. What is your status?" "It's a trap," Scarlett yelled over the comms, the sound of glass shattering echoing in the background. "The Falcones didn't move the bonds tonight, they moved their hitmen. The surface is crawling with them. They knew we were coming. Victoria, they are sealing the tunnel exits. Get Olivia out of there now." My blood ran absolutely cold. Above us, in the dark expanse of the exposed vault, the beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight suddenly clicked on, sweeping directly down through the hole and landing squarely on my face. "Contact in the sub-basement," a gruff, heavily armed voice echoed from the vault above. "Open fire." End of Part 7. Part 8, The Collapsing Empire. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the subterranean silence, instantly turning the superheated tunnel into a merciless kill zone. Before my brain could even process the flashes of muzzle fire erupting from the exposed vault above, Victoria was already moving. She didn't just grab me, she launched her entire body at mine with the sheer, unstoppable force of a freight train. We slammed hard into the damp gravel, rolling violently behind the thick, reinforced steel legs of the demolition scaffolding just as a hail of bullets shredded the exact spot where I had been standing a fraction of a second prior. Concrete dust exploded into the air. The hissing puddles of molten slag were kicked up by the ricocheting rounds, creating a terrifying, blinding storm of sparks and flying debris. "Covering fire. Suppress that hole," Victoria roared over the deafening chaos, her voice slicing through the panic with absolute terrifying authority. The Rossi mercenaries didn't hesitate. They abandoned the winch cables and raised their heavy assault rifles, unleashing a devastating wall of retaliatory fire directly up into the vault. The sound was apocalyptic in the confined space of the tunnel. Empty brass casings rained down around us, clinking against the rocks. I was pressed flat against the ground, gasping for air, the heavy Kevlar vest suddenly feeling like a crushing weight on my chest. Victoria was draped protectively over me, her trench coat acting as a shield against the raining debris. Her face was inches from mine, her chest heaving, her icy blue eyes wide and entirely consumed by a feral protective rage. "Victoria! Do you hear me?" Scarlett's frantic voice crackled through the earpiece, entirely distorted by the sound of sirens and heavy artillery on the surface. "They are flooding the industrial district. The Falcones have a private army up here. They are moving to seal the subway grates. You have to get her out of there right now. The primary exit is compromised." Victoria shouted back into her comms, ducking her head as a chunk of shattered brick exploded against the scaffolding inches from us. We are pinned beneath the vault. How many men do they have? Too many. It was a setup, Victoria. Someone tipped them off, Scarlett yelled, the unmistakable sound of a shotgun blast echoing through her mic. I'm holding the perimeter, but I can't hold it forever. You find another way out and you bring her back to me. Do you understand? Bring her back. I will, Victoria promised, her voice dropping to a deadly, resolute whisper. Comms cut out, leaving only the localized nightmare of our gunfight. Victoria rolled slightly off me, drawing a massive, customized hand cannon from her shoulder holster. She fired 3 blind, deafening shots upward to force the Falcone gunman back from the ledge. She turned to me, grabbing the collar of my tactical vest, her grip ironclad. Olivia! Look at me. I was paralyzed, my hands pressed over my ears, entirely overwhelmed by the sensory overload of my first real firefight. Olivia! Victoria commanded, her tone slicing right through my terror. I forced my eyes open, meeting her piercing, intense gaze. You design the infrastructure of this entire city block. Think, if the main tunnel exits are sealed, where does this transit line intersect? Give me an alternative route. My mind was entirely blank, short-circuiting under the adrenaline. But as Victoria's cold, gloved hands gripped my shoulders, grounding me, my architectural training violently kicked in. The blueprints, the geographical layout, the water displacement systems, the drainage mains, I gasped, my voice shaking. When they built the high-rise, they had to divert the city's primary stormwater runoff. There's a massive, reinforced subterranean aqueduct that runs parallel to this transit tunnel. It flushes directly out into the Chicago River. How far? Victoria demanded, firing another suppressed shot over her shoulder. 50 yards, I calculated, visualizing the grid. Directly east. But it's separated by a solid 4-foot retaining wall. That is not a problem, Victoria said, a terrifying, predatory smile finally breaking through her stoic mask. She tapped her comms. Demo team. Fall back. Leave the servers. Set a directional breaching charge on the east wall, bearing 090. We are making our own door. The mercenaries instantly obeyed. They dropped their suppressing fire, moving with military precision as they fell back behind the cover of the tunnel curvature. 2 of them sprinted to the east wall, slapping heavy blocks of C4 against the damp, ancient bricks. They're rappelling down, one of the guards shouted. I looked up. Thick tactical ropes had dropped through the molten hole in the ceiling. Heavily armed Falcone hitmen in black tactical gear were sliding down into the tunnel like a swarm of deadly spiders. Move, Victoria ordered. She grabbed my hand, yanking me to my feet. We sprinted down the tunnel, our boots slipping on the wet gravel. Bullets whizzed past us, striking sparks off the walls. I had never run so fast in my entire life. The sheer terror was intoxicating, fueled entirely by the vice-like grip of the Mafia queen holding my hand, refusing to let me fall behind. Charges set. Fire in the hole, the demo expert screamed. Victoria threw me against the western wall of the tunnel, pressing her body tightly against mine to shield me from the blast. Cover your ears, open your mouth, she instructed. I did exactly as she said, squeezing my eyes shut. The explosion was catastrophic. The shockwave hit us like a physical, suffocating blanket, knocking the breath entirely out of my lungs. A massive fireball erupted in the confined space, turning the east wall into a jagged, gaping crater of pulverized brick and twisted rebar. Before the dust could even begin to settle, Victoria was moving. Go. Through the breach. We scrambled over the smoking rubble, diving through the freshly blasted hole just as the Falcone hitmen rounded the corner of the transit tunnel, firing blindly into the dust cloud. We tumbled down a steep, slick concrete embankment, landing hard in knee-deep, rushing water. We were in the aqueduct. It was a massive, circular concrete pipe, easily 20 feet in diameter, entirely devoid of light. The water was freezing, a shocking contrast to the superheated tunnel we had just escaped. The surviving members of Victoria's crew scrambled through the breach behind us. "Bring the wall down," Victoria ordered. The last mercenary through the hole tossed a frag grenade back into the transit tunnel. The secondary explosion collapsed the weakened ceiling of the breach, sealing the hole with tons of debris and trapping the Falcone hitmen on the other side. Total darkness instantly consumed us, broken only by the beams of our tactical flashlights sweeping over the rushing water. "Status?" Victoria demanded, her breathing heavy as she waded through the current. "We lost 2 men in the initial ambush," the lead mercenary reported grimly. "We have 4 left. Ammo is running low." "Keep moving east," Victoria commanded. "Follow the current. It will dump us into the river." She turned to me. The water was up to my thighs, freezing my legs and soaking my cargo pants, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins kept the cold at bay. Victoria reached out, her hands surprisingly gentle as they checked over my arms and torso for injuries. "Are you hit?" she asked softly, the absolute chaos of the moment fading as her intense blue eyes focused entirely on me. "No," I breathed, my chest rising and falling rapidly. "No, I'm okay." "You shielded me." "I told you I would not let you get hurt, Olivia," Victoria said, her voice a low, intimate rumble that echoed strangely in the massive concrete pipe. She stepped closer, the rushing water swirling around our legs. The icy, untouchable boss was entirely gone. In her place was a woman fiercely, desperately protective of what belonged to her. She reached up, her gloved thumb wiping a streak of dark soot from my cheek. "You saved our lives back there. Your mind, you are magnificent under pressure." I looked up at her, my heart doing a completely different kind of frantic hammering. I just remembered the blueprints. "You did more than that," she whispered, leaning in so close I could feel the heat of her breath against my lips. "You proved you belong in this world. You belong with us." Before I could reply, my earpiece crackled violently to life again. "Victoria, if you can hear me." It was Scarlett. But her voice was wrong. It wasn't the fierce, commanding roar of the predator I had come to know. It was weak, breathless, punctuated by the terrifying sound of heavy, agonizing coughing. Victoria instantly stiffened, stepping back from me, her hand flying to her earpiece. "Scarlett, I hear you. We are in the drainage mains. We are moving toward the river. What is your status?" There was a long, agonizing pause filled with the sound of distant, localized gunfire and the squeal of tires. "I'm pinned down at the extraction point," Scarlett rasped, the sound sending a jagged spike of pure terror straight through my chest. "They flanked us. They had armor-piercing rounds. Victoria..." "I'm hit." The color entirely drained from Victoria's face. The Ice Queen shattered in real time. "Where, Scarlett?" "How bad?" "Bad," Scarlett choked out, a wet, terrible sound following her words. "I can't hold the perimeter. I ordered the remaining cars to fall back. You have to get to the river. There's a contingency boat docked at Pier 44. Get Olivia on that boat." "I am not leaving you behind," Victoria roared, a sound of such raw, agonizing desperation that it made the mercenaries flinch. "I am coming up to the surface." "No," Scarlett screamed, the effort clearly costing her dearly. "It's a slaughterhouse up here. They are waiting for you to surface. You protect the architect. You protect our little bird. Promise me, Victoria. Promise me." "Scarlett, do not do this," Victoria begged, her voice cracking, her icy composure completely obliterated by the impending loss of her sister. I stood frozen in the freezing water, tears hot and fast streaming down my face. The woman who had kissed me, who had claimed me, who had made me feel utterly invincible was dying on the cold asphalt above us. "Olivia," Scarlett's voice crackled through my earpiece. It was impossibly soft now, fading fast. "Are you there, little bird?" "I'm here," I sobbed, pressing my hand against the earpiece. "Scarlett, please hold on. We're coming." "You look so damn good in green," she whispered, a faint, heartbreaking echo of her playful smirk bleeding through the radio transmission. "Don't go back to your old life. Burn the city with my sister." "Scarlett!" I screamed. A massive, earth-shattering explosion rocked the surface far above our heads. Concrete pipe around us violently shuddered, dropping a shower of dust into the rushing water. And then the comms went dead. Only a hollow, endless static remained. End of Part 8. Part 9, The Blood in the Water. The static in my earpiece was the loudest, most agonizing sound I had ever heard. It hissed and popped, a hollow, mechanical tombstone for the most vibrant, terrifyingly beautiful woman I had ever met. "Scarlett," I whispered into the darkness of the aqueduct, my voice trembling so violently it barely constituted a sound. "Scarlett, please." Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating white noise. Beside me in the freezing, rushing water, Victoria stopped moving. The towering, untouchable Ice Queen, the woman who commanded armies and terrified billionaires, slowly sank to her knees. The freezing water rushed past her waist, soaking the heavy tactical trench coat, but she didn't seem to notice. Her shoulders hitched. A singular, ragged, agonizing sound tore from her throat, a raw, guttural sound of a soul being ripped entirely in half. The 4 surviving mercenaries immediately turned away, casting the beams of their flashlights down into the water, granting their queen the only thing they could in this horrific moment, a few seconds of private, absolute devastation. I stood paralyzed, the icy water numbing my legs while scalding, uncontrollable tears streamed down my face. I had known Scarlett Rossi for exactly 24 hours. In the rational world, you don't mourn a woman you met yesterday. But nothing about this world was rational. Scarlett hadn't just saved me from a freezing street. She had reached into my chest, grabbed my broken heart, and violently jump-started it. She had kissed me with the force of a hurricane. She had claimed me. And now she was gone, buried under the burning rubble of a betrayal. For exactly 10 seconds, Victoria mourned. She let the agony break her. And then I watched a terrifying metamorphosis take place. Victoria slowly rose to her feet. When she turned to look at me, the devastation in her icy blue eyes was gone. The grief had been instantly, brutally weaponized. Her irises looked like shattered glass, completely devoid of warmth, mercy, or humanity. She was no longer a grieving sister. She was a god of vengeance, and she was going to drown the entire city in blood. "We move," Victoria commanded, her voice devoid of any inflection. It was a dead, hollow sound that was somehow infinitely more terrifying than her rage. She turned and began wading eastward through the deep, rushing water, her tactical flashlight cutting a sharp, uncompromising beam through the subterranean darkness. I scrambled to follow her, my numb legs burning with the effort. The march through the drainage main felt like a descent into purgatory. The water was waist-deep in some sections, dragging at our clothes, actively trying to pull us under. We walked for what felt like hours. My muscles screamed in protest, and my chest burned with every freezing breath of the damp, foul air. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Scarlett's final words echoed in my mind on an endless, agonizing loop. "Don't go back to your old life. Burn the city with my sister." I gritted my teeth, forcing my shivering body to keep moving. I wasn't an architect anymore. I was a survivor of a Mafia war. Finally, the pitch-black darkness of the tunnel began to break. A faint, ambient glow appeared in the distance. The sound of the rushing water changed, echoing outward instead of bouncing off the concrete walls. We had reached the outfall. We waded up to a massive, rusted iron grate that overlooked the dark, choppy waters of the Chicago River. Beyond the grate, the city skyline glittered against the night sky, a beautiful, sprawling metropolis that was currently completely oblivious to the war raging in its underbelly. "Cut it," Victoria ordered. One of the mercenaries pulled a compact bolt cutter from his tactical pack. With a few sharp snaps, the ancient rusted chains holding the grate gave way. The heavy iron swung open, groaning loudly in the quiet night air. We climbed out of the pipe, collapsing onto the damp wooden planks of Pier 44. The freezing night wind cut straight through my soaked cargo pants and tactical shirt, making my teeth chatter violently, but I forced myself to stand up. A sleek, heavily armored matte black speedboat was tied to the end of the dock, bobbing gently in the dark water. It was our contingency. Our ticket out of the slaughterhouse. "Get on the boat," Victoria commanded, her eyes rapidly scanning the dark, empty shipping containers lining the pier. She drew her customized hand cannon, keeping it aimed squarely at the shadows. "Prime the engines. We are leaving." The mercenaries scrambled onto the deck, immediately rushing to the controls. I stepped toward the edge of the dock, reaching out to grab the boat's railing. Suddenly, a blinding array of high-intensity floodlights snapped on from the top of the shipping containers, illuminating the entire pier in a harsh, inescapable glare. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes, entirely blinded. "Nobody moves," a booming voice echoed over a megaphone. "Drop the weapons, Rossi. You're completely surrounded." My heart stopped. Scarlett had been right. It was a complete setup. The Falcones hadn't just anticipated our tunnel breach, they had anticipated our escape route. They had bought out someone on the inside. Through the glaring light, I could make out the silhouettes of at least a dozen heavily armed Falcone hitmen stepping out from behind the shipping containers. They had assault rifles raised, the red laser sights cutting through the misty air and coming to rest directly on Victoria's chest. "It's over, Victoria," the lead hitman sneered, walking slowly down the pier toward us. "Your sister is dead on the asphalt. Your crew is wiped out. The boss wants you alive, but he didn't say anything about the girl. So you can drop the gun and get in the van, or we can blow the architect's head off right now and drag your corpse back instead." A cold, absolute stillness descended over Victoria. She didn't drop her weapon, nor did she raise it. She stood between me and the hitmen, her trench coat dripping river water onto the wooden planks. "You think you have one," Victoria said, her voice carrying over the wind, smooth and chillingly calm. "You think you have trapped a rat in a corner. But you have only managed to lock yourselves in a cage with a monster." Victoria didn't hesitate. In a blur of motion so fast my eyes could barely track it, she raised her weapon and fired twice. The lead hitman's head snapped back, his skull exploding in a spray of red mist before his body even hit the dock. Absolute chaos erupted. The remaining Falcone men opened fire. The deafening roar of automatic weapons tore through the night. 2 mercenaries on the boat laid down heavy suppressing fire, the heavy caliber rounds tearing through the metal shipping containers. Victoria grabbed me by the tactical vest and threw me hard behind a thick wooden piling, shielding me from the incoming hail of bullets. Wood splinters exploded around my head as the heavy rounds chewed through our only cover. "Stay down," Victoria roared, leaning out from behind the piling to return fire. She was lethal, every single shot finding its mark, dropping 3 more men in a matter of seconds. But she was severely outnumbered. I huddled behind the wood, my hands clamped over my ears, hyperventilating. I was going to die here. We had survived the tunnels just to be executed on a freezing pier. Suddenly, I heard a sharp, sickening thud. I looked up to see one of the Rossi mercenaries on the boat slump over the steering console, a massive hole in his chest. The suppressing fire from the boat instantly died down. Taking advantage of the gap in our defense, a Falcone hitman broke cover. He sprinted silently down the side of the pier, flanking our position. Victoria was entirely focused on the men in front of her, reloading her weapon with mechanical precision. She didn't see him coming. The hitman raised his shotgun, aiming it directly at the back of Victoria's head. He was only 20 feet away. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. "You hold the power of life and death in your hands right now, little bird." Scarlett's voice whispered in my ear, as clear as if she were standing right beside me in the freezing wind. You just have to pull the trigger to finalize the paperwork. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. The absolute terror that had paralyzed me was instantly vaporized by a blinding white-hot surge of pure, protective rage. They had taken Scarlett. They were not going to take Victoria. I reached down to my thigh holster. My fingers wrapped around the cold grip of the matte black 9mm pistol Scarlett had given me in the armory. I drew the weapon, dropping to one knee, my soaked cargo pants sliding against the wet wood. Feet shoulder-width apart. Balance your weight. I raised the gun. I aligned the sights directly with the center of the hitman's chest. My hands, which had trembled all night, were suddenly terrifyingly steady. I pulled the trigger. The recoil snapped my wrists back, the sharp crack of the gunshot ringing in my ears. The hitman stopped dead in his tracks. A dark crimson bloom instantly exploded across his chest. His eyes widened in shock, the shotgun slipping from his fingers before he collapsed backward into the dark waters of the river with a heavy splash. Victoria spun around, her weapon raised, but the threat was already eliminated. She looked at the ripples in the water, then slowly turned her gaze to me. I was still kneeling on the dock, the smoking gun gripped tightly in both hands, my chest heaving, my eyes wide and feral. I had just taken a human life. And God help me, it felt absolutely empowering. Victoria's icy blue eyes locked onto mine. In the flashing chaos of the floodlights and gunfire, I saw something shift entirely in her expression. The respect she had for me as an architect morphed into something entirely different. She looked at me as an equal. "Move!" Victoria shouted. She grabbed my arm, pulling me up, and we sprinted the last 10 feet across the exposed dock. We dove over the railing of the armored speedboat just as the remaining Falcone hitmen reloaded and resumed their barrage. "Punch it!" Victoria roared at the last surviving mercenary at the helm. The heavy, twin outboard engines roared to life with a deafening whine. The boat violently lurched forward, the immense G-force throwing me back against the leather seats. We tore away from Pier 44, leaving a massive white wake in the black water. Bullets skipped harmlessly off the reinforced armor plating of the boat's hull as we disappeared into the darkness of Lake Michigan. I lay on the deck of the boat, staring up at the cloudy night sky, gasping for air. My clothes were soaked with freezing water, my face was covered in concrete dust and soot, and my hands were still gripping the pistol with a white-knuckle intensity. Victoria crawled over to me. She didn't say a word. She simply reached out and pulled me up into a sitting position, wrapping her heavy, soaked trench coat around my shivering shoulders. She pulled me against her side, holding me in a fierce, unbreakable grip. I looked back at the receding Chicago skyline. Somewhere in that glittering expanse, Scarlett was gone. And the men responsible thought they had won. I slowly lowered my gun, turning my gaze to Victoria. Her beautiful face was completely devoid of emotion, a mask of pure, unadulterated ice. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice entirely stripped of the innocent girl I had been yesterday. Victoria stared out into the dark water, her blue eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. "Now," Victoria whispered, a terrifying promise etched into every syllable. "We find out who betrayed us. And then we burn their entire world to ashes." End of Part 9. Part 10, The Queens of Ashes. The armored speedboat cut through the pitch-black waters of Lake Michigan for what felt like an eternity. The freezing wind whipped against my face, numbing my skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the absolute hollow void that had opened up in my chest. I sat huddled on the deck, wrapped in Victoria's heavy, soaked trench coat. The matte black pistol still rested on my lap, my fingers stained with concrete dust and gunpowder. I had killed a man. I had pulled the trigger and watched the life leave his eyes. But as I looked across the deck at Victoria, who was standing at the bow like a solitary carved statue of ice and grief, I felt absolutely no remorse. I felt only a dark, consuming resolve. If I had to pull that trigger 1,000 more times to keep her safe, I would do it without a second of hesitation. The boat eventually slowed, gliding into a hidden subterranean grotto beneath a private, heavily wooded island miles off the Chicago coastline. It was a Rossi safe house, a fortress carved directly into the bedrock. The remaining mercenary tied the boat to the steel dock in complete silence. Victoria finally turned around. The icy, flawless mask of the syndicate boss was back in place, though the absolute devastation in her eyes betrayed the truth. She walked over to me, extending a gloved hand. "Come, Olivia," Victoria said softly, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. I took her hand and let her pull me to my feet. My legs were shaking, entirely drained of adrenaline. We walked up a set of spiral iron stairs, emerging into a stunning ultramodern safe house comprised of dark wood, black leather, and floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass overlooking the dark lake. "Secure the perimeter. No communications in or out," Victoria ordered the mercenary before dismissing him. We were finally alone. The silence of the safe house was suffocating. Victoria walked over to a wet bar, pouring 2 glasses of neat bourbon with hands that trembled so slightly I almost missed it. She handed me a glass. I took it, our fingers brushing. Her skin was freezing. I didn't drink. I set the glass down and looked at the woman who had lost her entire world tonight. "Victoria," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so sorry." Victoria closed her eyes, taking a slow, agonizing breath. When she opened them, the tears she had refused to shed finally spilled over her dark lashes. The Ice Queen shattered completely. She didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward and collapsed against me. I caught her, wrapping my arms fiercely around her tall frame. She buried her face in the crook of my neck, her hands gripping the back of my tactical shirt with a desperate, crushing intensity. Her body racked with silent, agonizing sobs. I held her, burying my face in her wet, platinum blonde hair, letting my own tears fall freely. In that moment, she wasn't a terrifying mafia boss, and I wasn't an architect. We were just 2 women mourning a sun that had been violently extinguished from our sky. "She told me to burn the city with you," I whispered fiercely into the quiet room. "And I will. I swear to you, Victoria, I will help you tear the Falcone Empire down to the bedrock." Victoria slowly pulled back, her blue eyes locking onto mine. The raw, unfiltered emotion in her gaze was staggering. She reached up, her thumbs gently wiping the soot and tears from my cheeks. "You saved my life tonight, Olivia," Victoria murmured, her voice a rough, beautiful rasp. "You took a life to protect mine. You crossed the line of no return. You are no longer just an asset. You are my equal." She leaned in, and for the first time, Victoria kissed me. It wasn't the fiery, consuming heat of Scarlett's kiss. It was deep, agonizingly slow, and intensely possessive. It was a promise signed in blood and sorrow. I kissed her back, my hands tangling in her wet hair, anchoring myself to the only thing I had left in this brutal new world. Suddenly, a blinding white light cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, accompanied by the deafening, rhythmic thwip-thwip-thwip of heavy rotor blades. Victoria and I broke apart instantly, my hand flying instinctively to the pistol on the table. A heavily armored, black medical helicopter was descending rapidly onto the safe house's helipad outside. "I ordered total radio silence," Victoria hissed, placing herself between me and the glass, her hand cannon already drawn and aimed at the chopper. The helicopter touched down. The side door slid open. 2 Rossi medics in tactical gear jumped out, carrying a stretcher. My heart completely stopped in my chest. Lying on the stretcher, covered in bandages, her crimson blazer ruined and soaked in blood, was Scarlett. "Scarlett!" I screamed, dropping the gun and sprinting toward the door. Victoria was right behind me, abandoning her weapon entirely. We burst out onto the helipad, the wind from the rotors violently whipping our hair. The medics rushed the stretcher inside the safe house, transferring her to the sterile medical suite hidden in the back wing. "She took 2 rounds to the chest," the lead medic shouted over the noise, applying pressure to bandages that were already turning bright red. The Kevlar caught the worst of it, but the impact shattered her ribs and punctured her lung. She lost a massive amount of blood holding the perimeter, but she refused to go down until we confirmed your boat was clear. Victoria pushed past the medics, falling to her knees beside the surgical bed. "Scarlett," she choked out, grabbing her sister's pale, bloody hand and pressing it to her lips. "You foolish, beautiful idiot. You promised me you wouldn't die." Scarlett's dark eyes fluttered open. She looked terrifyingly pale, the usual vibrant spark in her gaze dimmed by pain and heavy sedatives. But when her eyes found Victoria, a faint, weak smirk touched her lips. "Can't get rid of me that easily, sister," Scarlett rasped, coughing weakly. Her gaze shifted, finding me standing at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down my face. Her eyes softened entirely. "Little bird. You made it out." "I made it," I sobbed, rushing to her side. I gently took her other hand, pressing it against my cheek. "Because of you. You saved us." You pulled the trigger," Scarlett whispered, her thumb weakly stroking my cheekbone. "My men, they told me. You shot a man to save Victoria. You really are one of us now, Olivia." "I am," I promised her, leaning down to press a soft, trembling kiss to her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere. Just please stay with us." "I intend to," Scarlett breathed, before her eyes rolled back and she slipped into unconsciousness as the medics began their frantic work. Victoria and I refused to leave the room. For 8 agonizing hours, we sat in the corner of the medical suite, our hands tightly intertwined, watching as the surgeons pulled the fragmented bullets from Scarlett's chest and repaired her lung. The sun slowly rose over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, washing away the horrors of the long night. When the lead surgeon finally stepped back and announced that Scarlett was stabilized and out of the woods, the sheer wave of relief that hit me was so powerful my knees buckled. Victoria caught me, pulling me into a fierce embrace, her face buried in my shoulder as she finally let go of the terror she had been holding on to. 3 weeks later, the world was a very different place. I stood in the massive, sunlit solarium of the main Rossi estate back in the city. I was no longer wearing damp cargo pants. I wore a bespoke, deep crimson pantsuit that mirrored Scarlett's chaotic energy, tailored to terrifying perfection. A sleek, custom 9mm rested comfortably in the leather shoulder holster strapped across my silk blouse. I was standing over the marble table, looking down at the glowing holographic projection of the Falcone Syndicate's remaining strongholds. The door opened behind me. Scarlett walked in. She was moving slowly, favoring her left side as her ribs continued to heal, but the lethal, predatory grace had fully returned to her steps. She stepped up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist, her chin resting on my shoulder. She smelled like expensive cherry perfume and danger, a scent that still sent an electric jolt straight to my core. "Plotting the demise of our enemies, little bird?" Scarlett purred, pressing a soft kiss to the side of my neck. "Just finalizing the structural collapse of their primary distribution center," I replied smoothly, leaning back into her warmth. "I found a flaw in the load-bearing columns of their warehouse. If we place the charges precisely at these 3 vectors, the roof will cave in perfectly. Complete destruction of their inventory, 0 civilian casualties in the adjacent buildings." "Brilliant," a cold, authoritative voice echoed through the room. Victoria stepped into the solarium. She looked flawless in a stark white suit, the ultimate contrast to our dark crimson. She walked over to the table, her piercing blue eyes scanning my calculations. She didn't look at me like an employee anymore. She looked at me like a queen surveying her most trusted general. "We found the leak, by the way," Victoria announced smoothly, pouring a cup of tea. "Seems your ex-girlfriend, Emma, was quite desperate after her accounts were frozen. She went to the police with your Vanguard credentials, hoping to cut a deal. The Falcone moles in the precinct intercepted the information. They knew we were coming for the blueprints." Scarlett's grip tightened around my waist, a low, dangerous growl vibrating in her throat. Shall I have her brought to the basement? I looked down at the map. 3 weeks ago, the thought of Emma's betrayal would have broken me. Now, she felt like a distant, irrelevant ghost from a life that didn't belong to me anymore. No, I said, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. She's nothing. Let her live with the absolute terror of knowing who we are, and knowing she can never ever return to Chicago. Focus our resources on the Falcones. We finish the war tonight. Victoria smiled, a terrifying, devastatingly beautiful expression of pure pride. She walked around the table and stopped in front of me. Scarlett released my waist but stayed close, her hand resting possessively on my hip. You have evolved into something magnificent, Olivia, Victoria murmured. She reached out, her cool fingers tilting my chin up. You came to us broken in the rain, and now you are the architect of our absolute reign. I looked between the two of them. Victoria, the cold, calculating ice queen who offered me impenetrable protection and absolute power. Scarlett, the fiery, chaotic predator who had claimed my heart and showed me how to burn the world down. They had trapped me in a velvet cage, only to hand me the keys to the entire kingdom. I belong here, I whispered, the truth of the words resonating deep in my bones. Scarlett leaned in, her lips brushing mine in a fiery, intoxicating promise. When she pulled away, Victoria closed the distance, her kiss deep, slow, and completely consuming. I had lost everything that night in the rain. But standing between the Rossi sisters, ready to tear a criminal empire down to its foundations, I knew I had gained the world. I was no longer just a girl with a broken heart. I was the architect. And our reign was just beginning. End of story. Wow, can we just take a collective deep breath together? Oh my God, guys. What an absolute roller coaster of a journey. You are watching your GL girlfriend, and if you made it all the way to the end of this insane 10-part story, thank you so much. I seriously love this community, and experiencing this intense ride with you has been absolutely incredible. Let's just break down what we just witnessed, because my heart is still pounding. We started with Olivia, right? Sweet, normal, hardworking Olivia. She was just trying to bring her girlfriend some cupcakes after a 14-hour shift, only to have her entire world completely shattered by Emma's betrayal. It was so heartbreaking to watch her walking alone in the freezing Chicago rain. But guys, the way this story flipped, from crying in a wet coat to pulling a trigger on Pier 44 and becoming the literal architect of a Mafia empire's destruction, that character development was top tier. She didn't just survive, she adapted, she learned, and she completely reclaimed her power. And, of course, we have to talk about the Rossi sisters. I mean, come on. How are we even supposed to breathe when they are in the room? The dynamic between them is just brilliant. On one side, you have Victoria, the Ice Queen. Cold, calculating, and always 10 steps ahead. The way she shielded Olivia in the tunnels, putting her own body on the line to protect her, it literally gives me chills. And then, on the other side, we have Scarlett, our fiery, chaotic, deeply possessive protector. That moment when Scarlett got shot on the surface? I'm not going to lie, I actually stopped breathing for a second. I thought we lost her. Contrast between Victoria's icy dominance and Scarlett's burning passion is exactly what makes this WLW dynamic so ridiculously addictive. But now I really want to turn it over to you guys. Let's have a chat in the comments right now. First question. If you were in Olivia's shoes, standing in that velvet library on the first night, would you have handed over those blueprints? Or would you have tried to run away? Be honest. Second question, and this is the most important one. Who stole your heart more? Are you Team Victoria, the commanding Ice Queen? Or are you Team Scarlett, the fiery protector? Or are you exactly like Olivia and you just can't choose between them? Let me know down below. And finally, did you feel a little bit of satisfaction when Emma's credit card got declined and she got evicted? 'Cause I definitely did. Karma is real, ladies. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me that you want more high-stakes, spicy, and thrilling girl love stories just like this one. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to your GL girlfriend and turn on those notifications so you never miss our next adventure. We have so many more amazing WLW stories coming up, and you definitely want to be here for them. Thank you all again from the bottom of my heart for watching, for commenting, and for being the absolute best audience ever. I love you guys so much. Stay safe, stay beautiful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.